Welcome back to Mayo Clinic Radio. I'm Dr. Sanj Kakar.
And I'm Tracy McRae.
In 1973, Ed Pompane received the gift of life, a kidney from his mother, no less, Helen. Ed's personal experience at Mayo Clinic led him to believe that the health and well-being of transplant patients and their families would be better if they could live in a home-like setting during their treatment. The goal was to provide Mayo Clinic transplant patients with high-quality, affordable accommodations that could offer the support that transplant patients need. In 1984, that goal became a reality when the Gift of Life Transplant House opened.
That's right. Gift of Life now has 2 houses in Rochester on either side of 2nd Street. And they provide services for solid organ, bone marrow, and stem cell transplant patients and their families. Patients of all ages come to Mayo Clinic from all over the world, and Gift of Life offers transplant patients a home away from home. And here to discuss is the director of the Gift of Life Transplant House, Mary Wilder, and joining her is the husband of a stem cell recipient, John Roise, to share the experience of life at the transplant house. Welcome both of you to the program.
Thank you so much for having us. We're just delighted to be here.
It's good to be here. It'll be a fun show.
Well, tell us, first of all, Mary, how long have you been the director at the Gift of Life Transplant House?
I have not even been there a year yet. I started on May 22nd. My husband has a business here in Rochester, and that commute from Apple Valley to Rochester was becoming a bit much for him after 18 years. And he said, how would you like to move to Rochester? And that's what brought us here. I actually was a kidney donor for my father 40 years ago. And I was so connected instantly to the mission and what I found at Gift of Life Transplant House. And that's what brought me here.
So Mary, obviously your passion is infectious. When you walked in the door, tell us about the culture and what you noticed about the Gift of Life Transplant House.
The very first thing I noticed was the warmth that was there. A very, very supportive feeling. It was just like walking into your own home and feeling that the patients and the caregivers that were there were very welcoming with one another. You know, I expected to find a situation where I would be encouraging individuals, where I would be the one saying, oh, it's going to be okay. We'll be praying for it, whatever it was. Instead, it's exactly the opposite. And that was from the very first day I walked in that I was being encouraged. I was being inspired by the courage I saw of guests who were dealing with very, very difficult situations, and yet living in a home-like environment where they could discuss all this with others.
How many patients or families do you usually see each year?
Well, last year in 2017, we were able to accommodate 4,625 guests and caregivers. The year before that, it was right around 4,000. So we are continuing to grow and continuing to accommodate more and more. And of course, the need is getting greater and greater as Mayo is expanding as well.
How often does a patient usually stay?
You know, the average stay is completely dependent on the type of transplant that an individual has. So our kidney recipients will be with us for 2 to 3 weeks, whereas our stem cell patients can be with us for their whole 100-day journey through getting that stem cell transplant.
And John, that's where you kind of come in, because your wife Susan is in that position. Tell us her story.
Yes, well, in 2011, actually, she had a stem cell transplant in September, and we went to a doctor. She said, where are you going to stay? We said, well, we'll stay at a hotel someplace. So have you ever thought about the Gift of Life? I said, what is that? She said, well, it's a place where transplant people can stay. I said, oh, well, that'd be interesting. So we went over and took a tour, which you must required to take one, and we saw the people, just like Mary said, such a friendly, warm atmosphere. And we were in the older house on the north side first. Mm-hmm. We stayed there, and the people were just great. And so that's what began our stay in the Gift of Life house.
And what was her diagnosis?
She has multiple myeloma, and so she was here. We were for 6 weeks in September 2011. And then she was on continuous chemo from that. It didn't really work but so she just completed the CAR T-cell transplant, which was 5 weeks ago. And so we're back here again, and it's the first place we want to stay as a Gift of Life house.
So John, obviously going through a diagnosis like this can be emotional and trying. Mm-hmm. When you came to the Gift of Life house, tell us how that changed things for you, how it made it easier to adjust to the treatment that Susan received.
You know, it's kind of like when I got drafted in the Army in the infantry during Vietnam. None of us wanted to be there, but we're all there, and so we're going to make the best of it. And that's kind of what that was, because everybody there had some issue that they were dealing with, some major issue. And so you just stick together. People are saying, we pray for you, like Mary said, we'll help you. What can we do to help you? And we're all in the same boat, so we find out their diagnosis and what they're doing. We encourage one another, which is so good.
So what is CAR T cell? Is that what you said? What is
CAR
that?
T cell, it's a clinical trial that they're doing. They've got FDA approval for myeloma. I'm sorry, some forms of lymphoma and some forms of leukemia, but they do not for multiple myeloma. So they take your T cells out and they send them to some lab for 4 to 5 weeks. They modify them, then they put them back in you, and you get real sick. But it attacks the cancer, and so we got results yesterday, and it's doing a fantastic job. So we're praying that God will heal her through this CAR T cell.
That's amazing.
It is.
And that's where the south side of the road, when you first came in, I said, oh, you guys are on the south side of the road because the bone marrow and the stem cell folks, that's where you all stay. What's the difference between the two houses?
You know, there is absolutely no difference between the two houses at all. Each house accommodates any type of transplant that's occurred. The houses are all set up to run exactly the same way. We provide, so just let me give you an overview, a little bit of what the house is like. Each guest has their own bedroom. The bedrooms have furniture in them, including beds, a recliner, a chest of drawers, their own bathroom that they can make use of. We provide linens for them. However, once you've become a guest at the house, now you're responsible for cleaning your own room, taking care of your own garbage. We also have communal dining areas and communal kitchens. So we don't allow any food in the rooms, and we don't allow any televisions in the rooms. We have TV sitting areas for guests because we want the guests to come out and mingle with one another and provide that support that Ed Pompane had the vision for so many years ago. He realized that people needed to be able to come to a home-like atmosphere rather than going to a hotel, sitting in that small little room doing nothing but watching TV. Here we can be out, we can eat together, we can mingle with one another and talk about what's happening. So the houses are set up in a way that would allow for that commingling of one another. So we have an exercise room, we have extensive libraries, we have different TV rooms set throughout the house, sunrooms, craft rooms, and those types of things.
So John mentioned going on a tour before enrolling into the house. Can you tell us the sort of process by which one, as you mentioned, they're not called patients, they're called guests.
That's right.
How the guests actually enter into the house.
Absolutely. Well, as you realize, both of you, because of the fact that once you've had a transplant, having a sanitary environment that's free, as much as possible, free of germs as you can have, is critically important. It's not just important, it's critically important. And so the tour allows us to explain to our guests how that is possible. We provide different types of cleaning products and tell them what types of cleaning products they should be using. We show them the communal dining areas and explain to them how cleaning is done. We have sanitizers for all the tables, for all of the kitchen areas. We explain how dishes are washed and cleaned. But that tour is critical not just to understand how we function and operate. It's also critical because you have to walk through the front doors of the house to understand that this is a place I can call home, and I can be comfortable, and I can focus and concentrate on my recovery instead of having to concentrate on how am I going to eat, how am I going to take care of myself.
Because you can be there for a long time. John, how long have you and Susan been at Gift of Life?
It was 5 weeks on Sunday we were here this time, and the previous time it was for 6 weeks.
And how much longer are you going to be here?
I think we're probably leaving this afternoon.
Oh, my goodness.
Depending on what the doctors say, but we'll have to leave this afternoon. But one thing about the Gift of Life House, and I've said this many times, is that you could provide us a free hotel room, the best hotel in Rochester, the free food, whatever it is, we would turn that down. We would stay at Gift of Life House because of the cleanliness and the comradeship and the quietness. It's just a great place to be.
Yeah, when you are someplace, you have to be someplace for 5 weeks or 6 weeks. It makes a big difference if it's a place that feels just a little bit like home.
It does.
It is. And we do have guests that are just celebrating their year anniversary. They've been with us for an entire year.
Wow.
So we've had guests stay with us as long as 3 years.
Because do they stay with you while they're waiting on the transplant list as well?
They can be with us while they're waiting for the transplant, right. Right.
And Mary, is there an upper limit of how many guests you can accept in the house?
There are, unfortunately, and so that's part of the discussion here for the future. We have 84 rooms right now between the two houses, 48 at what we call the original house and 36 at what we call the new house.
Well, we've been talking about the needs of transplant patients with Director of Gift of Life Transplant House, Mary Wilder, and current house resident and husband of a transplant recipient, John Roise and his wife Susan. We're going to take a quick break.
When we come back, we'll hear more about Susan's journey and experience here at Mayo Clinic. Welcome back to Mayo Clinic Radio. I'm Dr. Sanj Kakar.
And I'm Tracy McRae.
We're back to talk about transplant with Mary Wilder, Director of the Gift of Life Transplant House, and John Roise, husband of his beloved wife Susan, who has stayed at the house during a stem cell transplant and treatments.
I just wonder, John, how did Susan how many years ago, first of all, was she diagnosed?
Sue was diagnosed in May 13th of 2011.
And how did she know that she was sick?
It was her internal medicine doctor in Mankato, Minnesota, who diagnosed it. And then we were so fortunate we got to Mayo right away with Dr. Lacey. And I cannot say enough good about how professional and how great the staff is here at Mayo Clinic.
That's interesting. So you're close by. Mankato, for everybody else around the country who's listening, Mankato's not that far away.
An hour and a half to the west.
Yeah, but it still is. As a person who went through cancer treatment, I can completely understand why you would much rather stay. Maybe you'd rather move into the Gift of Life Transplant House if you could.
It'd be great. It's cheap there, and there's great people.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because as we were getting started, one of the first things that Dr. Kakar learned is that it is not Mayo Clinic's Gift of Life Transplant House. So there is no funding at all there.
No, we do not. We're a completely independent nonprofit. We do charge $30 a night for guests and their caregivers. So that's $30 for 2 people in the room. Obviously, that does not sustain the operational needs of the house. And as a result, we rely heavily on the generosity of benefactors who are so gracious. And we have a wonderful, wonderful base of individuals who provide funding for us. We just had an example of a gentleman who was celebrating his first liver transplant. He had never stayed at the house because they live right in Rochester, but he has visited us often and just loves Gift of Life Transplant House. As a result, he decided to hold a birthday party, and he asked his guests, rather than bringing presents for him, to bring donations for Gift of Life Transplant House. We experience those types of generous donations all the time, and of course continue to want to see those types of generous donations come to us.
Now, like Hope Lodge and the Ronald McDonald House, are you also always at capacity and in need of more rooms? Or
we generally run about 84% occupancy.
Okay.
We monitor very, very carefully what our occupancy rates are. It's very difficult to send people away to hotels, but we do have a working relationship with 5 of the hotels in town, and they provide a reduced rate. We're typically able to get the guests in a day. So they're not having to stay at the hotel very long, but it does really break our hearts when we have to send them away and say that they're not going to be able to stay with us.
Now, Mary, you talked about benefactor support. Are there other charitable ways that people can contribute, for example, fundraising events?
Yes, we have 2 or 3. Actually, this year we're going to have 4 different fundraising events that are coming up. Our first will be held August 25th, and it's a table setting fundraiser. So if you enjoy tablescaping, this is the event to come and see. Then in July 16th is our golf tournament. This will be our 34th annual golf tournament. Ed Pompane and his friends.
Ed likes to play golf.
Yes, and they've been enjoying that ever since the house started. And then in September 15th, we'll be having our Gala of the Decades. This year, our theme is the 1880s. So we're going back to the Western theme, and should be very fun.
And my favorite's coming up, though. That's the 5K.
Yes, the 5K. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, we have a wonderful group of individuals here on the Transplant Center at Mayo that provide all kinds of fundraising opportunities for us. And one of the most popular is the 5K that will be on June 3rd is the date that's coming up. That's a Sunday. It starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it is so much fun.
Yeah, I know patients that actually book their rechecks to come back so that they can take part in that, which is a pretty great thing. And not only that, but some of the other fundraising events as well.
Right.
And you're allowed to walk the 5K, is that
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's very true.
Yes.
Although as you're walking and you see that little 7-year-old child darting past you, that's a little bit of an intimidating thing, but no, you are allowed to walk.
John, what is it that made the gift of life easier? I mean, I know that you say you've got that camaraderie. You definitely don't feel like you're alone. But what do you tell people about why you come back when you are in the area?
I think one is the cleanliness of the place. Being, like Mary said, everything is so clean and it's so quiet. And everybody has an issue that's there, and the caregivers are doing their best as well. So you talk with them and meet people from all over the world that are there. We've made some good friends in Texas and some Kansas friends just here this time. And I think we'll probably, a lot of them are lifelong friends that have been there. The individual who was here for 3 years when we were here, he's still here. So you get to meet a lot of people, and they're really nice people because all are kind of hurting, and you can support one another. But I think the accommodations are so good in the first place, but the people that you meet and the way the place is run is really well.
Mary, you said that people can be on a wait list, a transplant wait list. So, I mean, that can sometimes take a long time. So you might have guests that stay quite a few, a year, you said?
We've just have they're currently at the house, just celebrated their year anniversary with us. And as you can imagine, that weighs heavily on them. That's a really difficult situation. But again, because of the fact that they're making, as John said, lifelong friends, so they're able to see people return. The other interesting phenomenon that happens is when you've lived in a place that long, it does become your home. And so we have caregivers who are helping to prepare meals for other guests and caregivers. And we have individuals who they just take it over and it becomes their house, and which is what we love to see, and helps them through that really difficult time. We just had an experience of a guest who was waiting for a second liver transplant. She'd been at the house for almost 6 months, felt herself getting sicker and sicker, said to me, I'm dying. I know I'm going to die. It was right before Christmas. She said, I'm going to go home and be with my family. I just want to go home and be with them and die. She sent her caregiver home, which is a no-no at the house, but we didn't know it. So she'd sent her caregiver home. The next morning, the call came. The very next morning, she decided to make that trip, that she was going to go home. The very next morning, that call came. And then, of course, she couldn't find anyone to take her to the hospital.
Oh, my goodness.
Another caregiver was able to take her there. But those are the kinds of stories that we hear all the time.
Yeah, I can't imagine, John, that you're the caregiver for Susan, but you also kind of become the caregiver de facto for other people there.
You do. There's an individual right now, Justin Lewis. When we were here 6.5 years ago, his wife was waiting for a lung, and he was here for 3 years.
Wow.
And he still comes back. So he had some surgery on his ear recently, but he comes back because he loves this place, and he knows so many people.
Sure.
Everybody knows him as well.
We've been talking with John Roise, husband of the transplant recipient Susan Roise and director of the Gift of Life Transplant House, Mary Wilder. Thanks, both of you, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.